All right, let's get it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. He's back in the bullpen. We have Mr. Daniel Idfresne. I've had him a time before. We were talking about Trump, economic policies. We're going to talk about tariffs today. Dear brother, thank you for coming back on the show. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
Absolutely. All right, let's highlight this clip. Harris Faulkner on Trump tariffs. Here it is.
And those 401k people who are depending, those retirees, all of that, just talking plain speak with them. Look, when this nation used to go to war, people in this country would support the war effort with their materials at home and making things for weaponry and all of that. We got to do 100% buy-in over this bumpy period. Just communicate.
Yeah, it's interesting how all of a sudden tariffs are a good thing, or economic non-progress is celebrated under the Trump administration. You have even more information about how console prices can raise by 40%. We're going to talk about this in a broader context. Tell us, you supported Trump. You have talked about supporting Trump. Tell us, how will the tariffs affect the gaming industry and other permeations outside of what we've discussed typically in the mainstream conversation?
Yeah, so in a piece I wrote for Reason, I talked about how the video game industry will be impacted by the Trump administration. And I think that video games is a very interesting case study, because video games, specifically console, falls into that class of durable goods, like washing machines, cars, and other goods like that Americans typically buy when they're economically stable. And because a lot of our consoles are made outside of the United States, tariffs could affect their prices and ultimately affect the video game industry. Even though the 100,000 American jobs are in the software side of the video game industry, consoles is a loss leader. So they already lose money before tariffs, but after, at least Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo can recoup those losses and make profits on the in-game content and whatnot. But if Americans don't buy those consoles in the first place, the video game industry will suffer.
Let me ask you this, and I do apologize, I'm having some delay with the sound. But so as it stands, Trump said, okay, we're raising the tariffs against China to 125% because he said they're disrespectful, basically. You have a significant cost, obviously, being passed to the consumer. I heard Trump say during a quasi-interview that he believes the tariffs are paid by the country that he has leveraged the tariff against. We know that to be holistically untrue. That's patently false. Consumers pay the tariff. That's how it works. Now, I'm interested to know, you voted for Trump. Do you have voters' remorse at this point, seeing what he has done in his first couple of months back in office?
I do not have voter remorse. Obviously, when it comes to economic policy, I'm cautious about a lot of the economic policy. There's reason to be cautious, some reason to be optimistic. On the optimism side, I would say some of the domestic investments from companies is a promising sign, although we'll see whether those investments are actually investments that they'll make, or just a form of lobbying in order to get on Trump's good side. And then there's also reason to be concerned that with the Reason magazine that I wrote, there's the Reason magazine that I wrote on the video game industry. I wrote another one for Regular Politics about sort of the spoil system, the way tariffs can induce the spoil system in government. And so I think there's reasons to be optimistic and also but more cautious, especially right now. With the 90-day pause, part of it is walking back, which is, I think, a quasi good sign. Personally, I mean, you shouldn't have gotten yourself in that position in the first place, but at least he's listening to the markets and to the American people when they say this is definitely not a good idea. When it comes to China, I think we have to wait and see how how the other 75 countries, what deals they end up making and whether they are beneficial to the American people or not, and how China will respond. There's a lot to look at, and we'll wait and see how a lot of these things have developed. But I'm definitely cautious and optimistic in several different, I guess, portions of what's going on in the economy.
Brother, when you talk about the 90-day pause, how that is, him listening to the market, him listening to the American people, these are problems he created. You would prefer to have a leader who listened to the American people, who listened to the market prior to effing it up. You don't want the leader that messes a bunch of stuff up and possibly can course correct in the middle, remedy some of it, and then declare a victory. That's not the kind of leadership we're talking about. We're talking about leadership that knows what to do on day one. That used to be a standard. All of a sudden, when Trump got in office, that was no longer the standard. So, Daniel, I want to pose this question to you. Obviously, you have a huge demographic of the population. They are engaged in gaming. It is a big consumer item for young people. You got holidays. When they come up, once again, big consumer item. What's going to happen? We're talking about 40%, maybe more, of an increase in what consumers will have to pay for basic gaming items. The last time you were on the program, we talked about why young people were voting for Trump. Well, is this enough of an incentive to give some young folk who voted for Trump because of whatever they believed about Trump, that they now say, well, we got to give pause. This guy's making us pay more for things that we actually like?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern for the Trump administration. Again, video games, like I said earlier, video games, consoles is a durable good for the American people. People typically buy those goods when they're economically stable. I know that for a lot of young people, GTA 6 is coming out later in the year, and I'm pretty sure the Nintendo for the Switch 2 at least, its release has been pushed back. And so, yes, a lot of these things cause consternation for the American people. Is going to be interesting to see over the next few years. I'm pretty sure Sony is coming out with the PlayStation 6, perhaps in 2026, and Microsoft is coming out with a new gen console as well. And this will be right in the middle of the Trump administration. And so it's going to be interesting to see how console sales, the performance of those sales after 1 or 2 years into this, I guess, new tariff regime by the Trump administration.
Let me ask you this. One of the purposes, according to the Trump administration, for these insane tariffs is to move manufacturing jobs to the United States of America. Now, if you're really about jobs, you should attack automation because that is the #1 job killer in America. And those jobs do not come back to that American who had it taken away by a robot. But let's just assume the administration is making a good faith argument. That's a hell of an assumption, but we're going to assume it. By increasing tariffs, let's say the industry of cars, right? Car making. Now you're telling the dealerships, okay, you got to make your cars in America now. They have no infrastructure then. They do not have the land. Many times they do not possess the expertise. They do not have the regulatory rights. None of these things exist. My point is, how do you create an infrastructure in 24 hours? Because they had no time, no industry had any time to adapt to the new tariffs that are so extreme that basically the only thing they can do is increase the cost of the vehicles increase the cost of the vehicles by the same amount of the tariff. So basically you're going to pay an additional 20 to 40% on the vehicle now in order to satisfy the new tariff that has been levied.
No, yeah, that's another great point, and that's another point that I make in some of the op-eds and other media hits that I've done. The very difficult thing, I think, the right tends to forget this, and like our manufacturing, U.S. manufacturing really became a powerhouse at the end of World War II. And that was a very specific, particular time in American history. Obviously, Europe and the Pacific, Japan specifically, were they had to rebuild, at the end of World War II, and America was placed in a very unique position in order to supply Europe and Japan, but that's not the case right now. And like you said, it does take a long time for infrastructure to be made. The fact is, yes, Trump talks about the 90,000 factories that were closed, but it takes a long time to bring them back. And you're right. When you impose tariffs at the level that I guess the Howard Lutnick side of the White House want to impose for revenue, which is another thing I'm sort of iffy on. I don't really think that you can close the federal deficit with tariff, which is like another thing we could talk about. But it takes a while for the infrastructure to come back. Now, and I guess on the optimism side, at least, I took time to study Apple's $350 billion contribution to the United States during Trump's first term. Between 2018 and 2022, they did create 17,000 new jobs. I believe their goal was to make 20,000. They did. They had an advanced manufacturing fund, and they supplied different manufacturing facilities that already existed money to increase production. And so perhaps some of the investments that companies have announced, I think Hyundai, TSMC, Taiwan's semiconductor chip manufacturer company, has also announced investments. But again, are these investments that these companies already are planning to announce in America, and they just happen to want to as a form of lobbying so they can, get some tariff reprieve? And B, how long will that take exactly for your, $500 billion?
Right, and that's the thing. He has no plan. You see, when you have a bold vision, it's not enough for it to simply be bold or for it to be a vision. It must have the element of implementation. You're asking for innovation and implementation without providing the allocation of time. That can't work. You're going to bypass a recession. While people are talking about we're not in a recession, he's bypassing that. You're going straight into a depression. Because once it hits every market so hard, you skip this intermediary point and you get right into a significant economic collapse, because coffee, clothes, and cars, those are the 3 C's in economics. When people start buying less coffee, clothes, and cars, you're at the brink of economic collapse. And I think you understand this studying economics yourself. So he's going to that. I mean, that started to happen now. And we're still arguing if these tariffs will work. I don't see how they can work, dear brother. Under any circumstance, how can these tariffs work? They're not working for us.
I think right now, the development that we saw yesterday, I think it's a good sign. I think the biggest problem with the Trump administration this term around has been the messaging problem. All right, so you want tariffs. Why? And there are 2 big camps within the White House. You have the Howard Lutnick camp, that said we're going to implement these tariffs, we're going to make revenue from these tariffs, and we aren't going to take them off. That's the Howard Lutnick's and Peter Navarro's. And then you have the Scott Bessent sort of side of the White House that sort of want to leverage some of the tariffs into deals and into a pressure campaign against China. I think with Scott Bessent coming out when the 90-day pause was announced and him talking was a good sign. I think that trade deals with the 75 countries that will come up there, I think that provides an opportunity for the Trump administration not to put in blanket tariffs, but to have very specific sort of like deals in terms of.
Let me say this. I don't mean to interrupt him at the end of the program, and I'm going to make a prediction. And Daniel, next time you come on the show, you can tell me I'm right or wrong.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll have more tariffs. There will be a doubling down of some of these additional tariffs. But what's going to happen is that Trump will make carve-outs. He'll make carve-outs for specific companies. Those companies will be able to buy, import, export. They can trade without having the penalty of that particular tariff. The reason why those companies are going to be given favored treatment is because of their loyalty to Trump. And that is where you're headed. Why? Because that's the way oligarchs work. That's how an oligarchy operates. You have to control import, export, and only pick your winners and losers from the White House. That's what he's headed to. That's my prediction. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong next time we talk. All right, dear brother?
Sounds good.
All right, man. Appreciate you being on the show. All right. Remember, take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of the planet. Remember, the truth is always indisputable.